Hey, Gestalt Education Nation. New sponsor alert. Today, we're excited to announce Dynamic Disc Designs and Jerome Fryer. We have an awesome discount code for you. Just use the code Gestalt to get a little bit of money off on the Dynamic Disc Designs. They're the most realistic anatomical discs that we've ever seen. If you caught our episode with Dr. Stuart McGill, you saw an entire shelf full of them. Everything from cavitation instruction to disc dysfunction to SI joint dysfunction, all sorts of amazing
joint
stuff.
movement,
Yes,
vertebral movement.
Absolutely. So go to Dynamic Disc Designs, use the code Gestalt. As always, you can use the code Gestalt on Core 360 belt to get a little discount on the belts there. We love to use that for biofeedback for teaching respiration, intra-abdominal pressure, and how the abdominal wall should be working during function. And then the last one, use the code Gestalt Education 10. Those will all be in the description in the podcast. Gestalt Education 10 at humanlocomotion.com to get off some money off of all of his awesome gadgets and tools and rehab materials. What's your favorite, Brett?
He's got a trunk full, but I think, integrating the Toe Pro in, I think, has been a game changer for us here at the office. So I think that would be my pick.
Beautiful. All right, guys, don't forget, use the code Gestalt, Gestalt Education 10. Visit the show notes and you'll be hooked up. Thanks. Enjoy the episode. All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Gestalt Education Show. Today, we're in Raleigh, North Carolina. We are in treatment room Mumma, sitting down with the one and only Lindsay Mumma, and we got a bunch of books laying out in front of us.
We got a pelvic floor behind the wall.
You can't see that.
We got a bunch of certificates on the wall, like kind of a blowhard, Lindsay, honestly.
Yeah,
So.
Really just douchebaggery.
Yeah. It's not about me.
Yeah, it's not about me. Oh, by the way, you wrote a book.
That happened. That did happen.
So if you're watching on the YouTube, you can see it. So you wrote a book, Your Pelvic Floor Sucks, but It Doesn't Have to, a whole body guide to a better pelvic floor by Lindsay S. Mumma, DC.
That's me.
Why the hell did you write a book?
Well, I spoke at Parker Vegas in 2022, and I was a little bit worried that I was talking underneath the audience. Like I had presented to students at Parker's homecoming in October of 21, and they were like, "Hey, would you do that pelvic floor talk that you did in Vegas?" And I was like, "Oh, cool, sure." And so that was like a really huge honor to get invited to that big of a seminar. And I was nervous because I had done that lecture for mostly students. And so this is mind-blowing stuff for students when you start talking about pelvic floor things, because you don't really get exposed to it. I went to Palmer. I don't know if you know, it's a fountainhead. And, we had an OB Peds class, like all together, obstetrics and pediatrics. That was the extent of the information that you would get. It's one class out of the whole chiropractic curriculum. So there's not a lot of information about women's health. There's not a lot of information about taking care of pediatrics. So anytime that you dive into those topics, students are just like, wow, what? There's so much to learn. I didn't know how much I didn't know. I kind of had like the whole day for that Parker Vegas seminar. And after every single session, I had people that were asking questions and they're like, where do I learn more about this? And I was like, oh, okay, good. I'm glad that I kept this at the level that I kept it at. But I also had people who said, I had people who were like, oh, I was going to come to your talk, but I don't really see a lot of pelvic floor stuff. Yeah, you do. You see a ton of pelvic floor stuff, but you just aren't asking questions that lead you to recognizing that you're dealing with pelvic floor stuff. And then I even had doctors who were male who said, well, I don't have a pelvic floor. And I was like, what is happening in the world? And so just the lack of awareness. And I think lack of awareness is the biggest problem. People are completely disconnected from this part of their body. So I didn't have anywhere to send these people who were asking questions. And I was like, I love writing. I really enjoy it. I have like a pretty extensive newsletter that I write on a regular basis. And it's writing is kind of like an outlet for me. So I think I'm just going to write a book about the pelvic floor. And the title that I first thought was All You Know Is That Your Pelvic Floor Sucks. It was like way too long of an actual title. Like the subtitle of this one is long, right? But your pelvic floor sucks is true because all that people know is that they can do a Kegel with their pelvic floor. So they can suck their pelvic floor up and in all the way up to their eyebrow, all at every single freaking stoplight that they stop at. And that's the only thing that they know. And they also know that their pelvic floor isn't doing what they want it to, because 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 5 women is leaking urine, and it disrupts their lives. And they're not telling their doctor about it, but it sucks. Like, that's a kind of crappy way to live your life. And some people even have bowel incontinence, a literal crappy way to live your life.
Right.
And they, nobody knows what the heck to do about it. And I think pelvic floor discussion is having a moment right now. Like, people are more open to talking about these things. So it was sort of a good time to sort of blast out some information. It also, like, this works very well when walking around to like hold the book like this, and people are like, did I just see? What is that title?
Right.
It grabs people's attention. And so, so I wrote a book. I was planning on like 220 pages. I got a little wordy.
Got a little windy, but no, it's great. I mean,
How much credibility did writing the book give you, do you think? Like, I mean, is it, because everybody says, oh, if you want to be an expert, you need to write a book. Like,
So I think that there's merit to that, right? Like, oh, you wrote a book. That sounds like a cool thing. I think that there are a lot of like trash books that are out there. Like, I wanted to write a good book that would bolster my credibility, not write a book to bolster my credibility, if that makes sense. Like, I think that there is something to it. Like, if you want to call yourself an author, there is some, authority that, like, that's like the same root word that's intentional. The people who wrote are the people who were kind of like leading societies. There's a reason why authorship is still like revered. But a lot of authors aren't actually writers. I actually write, and now I am an author. I mean, I published a couple of books about my first pregnancy experience several years ago. And that was just because people always wanted to know what I did in my pregnancy. So it didn't matter that I was telling them about pregnancy in general. They're like, but what about when you were pregnant? And so I just kind of journaled my second pregnancy. So I've already done this process, but this time I was like, no, I actually want like to get a book out into the hands of lots of people. So I wanted the doctors who were saying like, I don't have a pelvic floor, or I don't see pelvic floor stuff. And then I also wanted my patients to get more, like, this is way more information than what I can give you over a course of treatment, right? It doesn't matter how much time I spend with my patients. This is more information than what I can give to them. And I wanted the general population, like people that I'm never going to be able to put my hands on, I wanted them to be able to learn things that were going to make them better and give them better pelvic floor function.
Yeah, resource. Well, I mean, me personally, I first got exposed to you through MPI, through Motion Palpation Institute, but then you and your best friend Erica Boland also teach a course for us called Perinatal Manual Care. Yeah. And so I think that really put it to the forefront of some of the questions that maybe you should be asking your patients about their pelvic floor, male, female, ways to not make it weird, and ways to, like I always had the connotation or the thought that, well, I'm a male, it's going to be awkward if I ask a female about their pelvic floor, but in reality, it's just really not. So can you give us a little bit of a pep talk on that, of like, how would you approach it? And like, what are some of the questions and the complaints that you hear on a daily basis about the pelvic floor?
So the most common things that people fail to report but are experiencing would be stress urinary incontinence. So there's an increase in pressure on the pelvic floor and the bladder leaks urine. That would be the most common thing. And that is a thing that people experience. It disrupts their life. They have to do things differently in their life as a result of that happening, but they don't report it to anybody. So we, on our intake forms, which we're like in the middle of switching our EHR, hopefully Chiro up, I'm holding out for you guys. But the paperwork that we had that we're transitioning over to Chiro up is there's 3 questions on the paperwork that are related to pelvic floor dysfunction. And so, at this point, I've been in practice for 11 years, and for some amount of time of that, probably like the past 8-ish years at least, I've been intentionally doing pelvic floor work. So people know that. So it's just like, are you here for pelvic floor dysfunction checkbox? That's one way to do that, and just put it out there as like an opportunity for people to say, oh, yeah, that's a thing. And then I also, we put check boxes of symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction. So stress urinary incontinence. And that one surprised me that people don't know what that is. I kind of thought that people understood what that terminology was. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I didn't know what that meant. We all have the red flag question of, do you leak have you lost bowel or bladder control? We have that question, right? But so people think, oh, no, this isn't new. So then at the end of that question, we have added including stress urinary incontinence. So then that kind of like further brings up the question and the topic. And then I will make a pointed, direct question to the patient. I will look them in the eyes and I'll say, so do you have any leakage of any amount of urine if you cough, laugh, jump, or sneeze? And usually people will get a little dicey about that if they have failed to answer any of the other questions. And we haven't talked about it yet. And they're like, oh, no, right. They get sort of shady about it. And so I say, oh, okay. The reason why I ask is just because if that does come up, I wanted to let you know that that is something that we can help with. So, if you're hanging out on the sidelines at the kids' trampoline park instead of getting out there and having a blast, just let me know because we can work on some of those things. And they're like, oh, okay, And so it sort of puts the idea into their mind because maybe we just don't have the rapport yet to really get into those kind of personal conversations. But over time, we're going to get to the point where you realize like, oh, she's been able to help me with fill in the blank. So now you know what? I actually do kind of have some of that stuff you were talking about. We're like, I wear a pad all the time. I pee my pants every single time that I sneeze, and I haven't been to a trampoline park in years, As a male, the one thing, and I distinctly remember saying this on the first podcast that we did, there are more male OBs, or at least the same number. I mean, I don't know what the direct statistics are right now, but like there are male OBs as much or more than female OBs. Like they're way more intimate in what they're doing with patients than what we as chiropractors or manual therapists of any sort are. It's musculoskeletal tissue. It's inconveniently located, but you need to know about it.
Right. Well, and then this weekend, the reason why we're here is for DNS Exercise 1. And so part of the process of Exercise 1 or DNS-A, the whole first day is basically all about respiration, intra-abdominal pressure, this inner canister. And so we've discussed it kind of ad nauseum with you and Erica about how a lot of times if we just work on this canister, then some of these pelvic floor dysfunctions are coming around, like maybe it's not 100% fixed, if you will, but at least we're making changes with them without internal work and things like that. And so I think you expose that in this book as well as some of the easy things that you can do as you don't have to understand the intimate relationship of the anatomy and things like that to make big changes to your pelvic floor. So maybe what is like, if some random person on the street picks up your book and reads it, like what would you hope that they would take away from it that would maybe have a big effect on their pelvic floor?
I would hope that they recognize that the pelvic floor isn't a separate thing. So I think that one of the things that it has been so great about chiropractic for the entirety of the existence of our profession is that we have focused on the whole human. So even if we have like specialties that we kind of sink into, we have focused on the whole person. And so the pelvic floor is one part of the whole person. If their pelvic floor is not functioning, then some other things are also not functioning. Like it's impossible for you to be having pelvic floor dysfunction as like a solo dysfunction.
Right.
Other things are not working. So just recognizing that you can improve your overall health and your pelvic floor will respond accordingly. So I lay out, at the end of every chapter, there are exercises for people to do. And then I give a game plan of like, okay, let's figure out what your most dysfunctional dysfunction is. Start there and we'll triage a little bit. So like if you have raging bunions and like terrible TMJ pain, then we have to address those things because if we don't, your pelvic floor will suffer as a result of that. So it's 275 pages of here's what you need to know. And that's part of why I wrote a book was because there's so much that people need to know just to sort of unlearn all of the BS hand waving of like, oh yeah, that's just one of those things that happens whenever you have kids. And oh, it's one of those things.
Right.
No, it's not okay. What I say all of the time is that if your elbow leaked every single time that you laughed, you would definitely get that checked out. Like that is not normal. And you would want to figure out like why that shouldn't be leaking anything. Like I'm potty trained. I shouldn't be peeing myself right now.
Right.
So, what I want people to take away from this is that there are things that you can do. If you're a practitioner, you need to be asking questions and you need to understand a little bit more so that you can help support these patients. And then obviously you need to understand the function of the abdominal wall and how that relates to the pelvic floor and the core canister. And so, yeah.
Brett, you talked about this reflex called the Silver Stolpe reflex that was kind of first talked about. Was it in the 70s, maybe? I can't remember.
Probably it was in Levitt's first book, which would have been the 80s.
Okay,
Yeah.
80s. But anyway, so he kind of he thought that was linked to pelvic floor dysfunction, which we kind of talked about could be more of just like the upregulation of the tone and tension in the abdominal wall or in the lumbar spine erectors. Do you still feel like there's maybe a correlation there, though? Like if you have upregulation in the lumbar spine erectors, then you probably have some sort of pelvic floor dysfunction. Like, can you make that correlation?
Yeah, I mean, he originally talked about the pelvic floor, but I think, as Lindsay just said, I mean, it's just this inner unit together. And I think Sapsford and others, like in the early 1990s, I mean, they just exposed like how connected, these muscles are together. So, and I don't know why the pelvic floor is so neglected. I mean, it really doesn't make sense because I feel like the diaphragm gets a lot of attention. Certainly the transverse abdominis has had a lot of attention. So, I don't know why that has happened, but 100%. I mean, we saw that yesterday. I mean, we had a good example yesterday where just manipulation in itself can change that reflex in the paraspinal. So I think, as Lindsay said too, I mean, it's just like, is a chiropractor or physical therapist, I mean, you have this opportunity where you're able to mix and match really good rehabilitation, manipulation, soft tissue work. And I mean, it is such a crazy powerful tool, and it's like pieces of a puzzle. And if you put those pieces together well, I mean, your results can just be phenomenal. So
beautiful. And then where can people find it, Lindsay?
The number one bookstore in the world, which is kind of
Barnes-
a terrible place.
Barnes
It's
and
Amazon.
Amazon.
But if you go to yourpelvicfloorstocks.com, you can find it there, which is basically just going to link you to Jeff
And then
Bezos.
Yeah.
is there going to be another book, or what's the plan?
I mean, yeah, my oldest asked me, the end of writing this book, like the writing of the book was great. Kind of had some catastrophes locally that threw off a little bit of like wrapping up the project. But then the formatting of the book, a few things went real wrong. If I ever meet the woman that was responsible for completely jacking up my book, she might be a little terrified. I had to do formatting of my own book, which I have no idea. Like I had to download Adobe. I don't even know what the heck I'm doing. And so I was just like losing my mind over this. And my oldest son was like, "So you think you'll write another book, Mom?" And I was like, honestly, probably. I really haven't learned my lesson.
Yeah.
I love writing, and I think it's such a great way. Like, I this is going to sound a little bit arrogant, but like a lot of people want to bend my ear to talk about pelvic floor stuff. Like I don't have that kind of capacity. I want to take care of my patients. Mm-hmm. I love teaching. I love being a mom. Like I want to do the things that I love to do, and I don't necessarily have time, and people don't have the money to pay me for like the amount that goes in here. So for $20, you can get this, which is like hours upon hours of my thoughts and a ton of research that's available here that you can then go back and revisit. Like if we have a conversation, sure, you could record it, but like you're going to get so much more out of a book, and that makes it so attainable for people. Like the barrier to entry of this is so small. Like if you want to come and take a weekend course with me and Erica Boland, like we're only going to touch on the perinatal time period. Like that's mentioned in this, and then there's a plethora of more info, so I'll probably write another book or two, or I don't know. Thomas Schott said that he was going to illustrate for me in future ones. So if you're going to volunteer that, I mean,
that's insane.
Yeah.
I was just looking. Yeah. Never mind. We'll leave that lay.
We'll let that lay.
Leave that lay. Well, we're proud of you. I know that I give you a lot of crap, but it is really an amazing book. I have read it, even though you believe I haven't. But it's really good. It's a great it's a great guide. Honestly, like it's made for the layman's person, kind of. But there's also enough stuff for practitioners that don't feel like you're above reading this if you're a practitioner who's been treating the pelvic floor for years. Because there's so many clinical gold and so many gems in there that you should definitely have it. So I'll put the link in the bio below, and then I just have to put a subtle or a selfish plug for the perinatal course, because again, like that is, we've talked about it so much in DNS, and I love the pediatric courses and the women's health and stuff, but I feel like you and Erica really embody what Gestalt is all about with that course, and that is integration of manipulation, soft tissue, cranial work, TMJ dysfunction, like all of these things coming together for an awesome weekend. And even though it's in this perinatal period, like there's so many good takeaways you can put to other populations. And I mean, even your athletes, or it doesn't matter who you're working on, like there's just good stuff to take away from that. So
thank you.
And I mean, Brett and I talk about it, like you are top 5 in the world right now adjusting too. So like a Motion Palpation Institute class, like you've got to come watch Lindsay adjust. Like I remember the first time we met was at an MPI course. And so I was taken aback. Like I remember telling Brett, like, holy shit, she's like actually really good. So those are your 2 avenues. You got to come watch Lindsay in person lecture and treat, and then pick up Your Pelvic Floor Sucks. That way your pelvic floor doesn't suck.
How about it?
Okay, let's go jump in some really cold water.
Love it.
All right, thanks guys. Good luck with patience. See you next time. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Gestalt Education Show. If you liked it, share it, subscribe to it, send it to your friends, send it to someone that needs to hear this message. We really want everyone to be able to tune in and get the best clinical advice that they can, which we're hoping that we're giving to you with these special guests. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, or if you have any suggestions on upcoming conversations, let us know. For a list of our upcoming courses, we're adding them all the dang time. So go to gestaltedu.com, click on courses, and they'll all be right there for you. All right, have a good day.